coffee maker was still set for 2 cups. I hadn't changed it. 51 years of marriage, and my hands just kept doing the same things, filling the reservoir to the same line, setting the same timer, pulling 2 mugs from the cabinet before I remembered. Every morning for 3 months, I'd pulled 2 mugs. Patricia died on a Tuesday in October. Pancreatic cancer. From diagnosis to the end was 11 weeks. 11 weeks isn't enough time to say everything you need to say to someone you've loved since you were both 22 years old. It isn't enough time to prepare for a world that still has her reading glasses on the nightstand and her handwriting on the grocery list stuck to the refrigerator. I'm 67 years old. I spent 34 years as a civil engineer with the county. I'm not a dramatic man. I don't perform grief. I grieve the way most men my age were taught to, quietly, in the garage, with the door closed. But I need to tell this story, not because I want sympathy. I want you to understand what happened in the weeks after my wife died, so that if you ever find yourself standing in the same hallway I was standing in, stunned, confused, with a trash bag of your own belongings at your feet, you'll know what to do and what not to do. Patricia and I bought our house in Flagstaff, Arizona in 1989, a 4-bedroom ranch style on just under an acre. We raised our son there. We planted the elm tree in the backyard together the year he started kindergarten. That elm is taller than the roofline now. Our son is 38. His name is Preston. I want to be careful about how I describe Preston, because the truth is I spent a long time making excuses for him. Patricia did too, though toward the end she'd stopped. I remember her saying once in the hospital, 3 weeks before she died, that she worried about what would happen to me after she was gone. I told her not to worry about that. I told her I'd be fine. She looked at me with those gray eyes of hers and she said, "I'm not worried about you being lonely, Lawrence. I'm worried about Preston." I told her she was being dramatic. I was wrong. Preston had moved back to Flagstaff about 4 years before Patricia got sick. He'd been in Phoenix with his wife. I'll call her my daughter-in-law because that's what she is. On paper, though what she is in practice is something I don't have a polite word for. Her name is Nadine. She's 34, works in real estate, and has a way of looking at a room and calculating its square footage before she's even said hello. They moved back, they said, to be closer to family. I thought that was good. Patricia thought so too at first. They bought a condo in the south part of town. They came for Sunday dinners. Things seemed fine. Then Patricia got her diagnosis. I won't go into detail about those 11 weeks, except to say that I was with her every day, every hour I could manage. Nadine came to the hospital twice. Preston came more often than that, but there was a quality to his visits, something distracted, something calculating, that I noticed but didn't want to name. He asked about the will once. Once was enough. Patricia heard him ask. She didn't say anything. But I saw her face change in a way it didn't change again until the morphine took hold in those last days. Patricia passed on a Tuesday evening. The house felt like a held breath after that. Her sister flew in from Raleigh for the funeral, stayed a week, then went back home. Friends brought casseroles. My neighbor Gordon, who's been next door for 20 years, checked on me every couple of days, and Preston called. He called a lot, actually. I thought he was grieving. I thought those calls were a son reaching out to his father during the worst stretch of both their lives. I was grateful for them. I should have been listening more carefully to what he was actually saying. It took me a while to piece it together. Preston would ask how I was doing, and then always, after a few minutes, the conversation would turn to the house, to my plans, to whether I'd thought about what I'd do long term. He phrased it gently. He phrased it like concern. About 6 weeks after the funeral, he and Nadine came over for dinner. I cooked. I was glad to have something to do with my hands. We ate at the kitchen table, and the conversation was normal enough, and then after the dishes were cleared, Preston set his forearms on the table, and he said he wanted to talk to me about something. He said the house was too big for one person. I agreed with him. It is too big. 4 bedrooms for one 67-year-old man is too big. He said it must be hard to keep up with, all the maintenance and the yard. I told him I managed fine. He said he and Nadine had been thinking, and they thought it might make the most sense, financially, practically, if I moved somewhere smaller. A senior community, maybe. Something low maintenance. And they could take over the house. Keep it in the family. It made sense, didn't it? I want you to understand that I sat there for a long moment before I said anything. Then I said I wasn't ready to make any decisions about the house. Nadine said very calmly that the house was actually in Patricia's name. She said she'd looked into it. The original deed, from 1989, had been in Patricia's name alone because Patricia's father had given us the down payment as a gift specifically to his daughter, and the title had never been updated to reflect both of us. She said she wasn't trying to cause any trouble. She just thought I should understand the legal reality. I looked at my son across my own kitchen table. He didn't look away. He looked sorry, the way people look sorry when they've already decided. I told him I needed time to think. They said, of course. They said, take all the time I needed. And then they left. And I stood in the kitchen for a very long time, and I did not allow myself to feel what I was feeling, because if I had let myself feel it, I would not have been able to do what I needed to do next. I went to the bedroom. On the top shelf of the closet, behind a box of Christmas ornaments, Patricia had told me in the hospital, in the quiet hours before dawn when it was just the two of us, that she had left me something. A letter. She said I'd know when to read it. I took the envelope down. I held it for a minute. Her handwriting on the front. My name Lawrence in her careful cursive. I put it in the drawer of my nightstand. I wasn't ready yet. 3 days later, Preston called and said he'd spoken with an attorney. He said the attorney had confirmed that, without a will, the house would most likely pass to him as Patricia's only child, and that as her surviving spouse, I might have certain rights to remain on the property temporarily, but that the legal picture was complicated. He said he didn't want things to get complicated. He said maybe the cleanest solution was for me to find a place of my own and let them handle the sale or transfer of the property. I asked him if he was asking me to leave my home. He said he was trying to find a practical solution. I told him I'd call him back. I sat down at the desk in what used to be my office, and I opened the laptop Patricia had bought me for my retirement. I am not a foolish man. I was a county engineer for 34 years. I know how to research. I know how to research. I know how to read documents. And what I found, when I started reading, made me very calm in the way that only comes when you realize the situation is actually the opposite of what someone is trying to convince you it is. Arizona is a community property state. Regardless of whose name was on the deed, the house became community property the moment we were married and living in it as our marital home. The fact that the original purchase was funded by Patricia's father did not change 33 years of that house being our shared life. I had legal rights as a surviving spouse that Preston and Nadine, or their attorney, either didn't know about or had decided to gamble. I didn't know about or had decided to gamble. I also found a number for the Arizona State Bar's lawyer referral service. I called it. The attorney I spoke with the next morning, a woman named, I think, something starting with M, though I didn't write it down at the time, confirmed everything I'd read. She also told me that my position was strong and that if Preston wanted to pursue this, he was welcome to, but that he was likely to find the legal reality less convenient than his Scottsdale attorney had suggested. I thanked her. I went home. I sat in the kitchen with my coffee. 1 cup. I had finally started making 1 cup, and I thought about what to do. And then my son showed up at the door with a cardboard box. He said Nadine was in the truck. He said they'd gotten a moving company to come the following Saturday. He said he brought me a box to start with, something to put the personal items in, the things from the bedroom, the photographs, whatever I wanted to take. He said the furniture would be inventoried and they'd let me know which pieces I could have. He said, and I want to be precise about this because it is the thing that finally emptied something out of me that I don't think will ever be refilled. He said he was sorry it had come to this, but that his mother would have wanted things to be handled cleanly. His mother. He used his mother to say that to me. I took the cardboard box from him. I set it just inside the door. I told him I'd be in touch. He left. I watched the truck pull out of the driveway. I went to the bedroom and I took the envelope from the nightstand and I finally opened it. Patricia had 3 kinds of handwriting. There was her grocery list handwriting, quick and a little cramped. There was her card handwriting, the careful cursive she used for birthdays and thank yous. And there was a third kind I'd only seen a few times, slower, more deliberate, the handwriting she used when something really mattered. The letter was the third kind. She wrote that she'd had a feeling and that she was sorry for having it, but that she'd watched Preston over the past several years, and she'd watched Nadine especially, and she had a feeling about what might happen. She wrote that she hoped she was wrong. She wrote that she loved Preston, that he was her son, and she would love him until she had no more capacity for love, but that she had seen who he became when Nadine was in his ear, and she was afraid for me. She wrote, "I have taken care of things, Lawrence. You will be all right. I need you to call Alan Marsh." Alan Marsh is an estate attorney in Phoenix. Patricia had gone to see him, alone, 8 months before she was diagnosed. Not 8 months after the diagnosis, 8 months before. She had done it quietly, the way she did everything important. She had rewritten her will, updated the beneficiary designations on her accounts, and put the house that was always in her name, into a revocable living trust with me as the sole beneficiary. And then she had made a secondary provision that I only fully understood when I sat across from Alan Marsh 3 days after I opened that letter. Patricia had money that Preston and Nadine did not know existed. Her father had been a careful man, a machinist from Dayton, Ohio, who had invested steadily and quietly for 40 years. When he died 15 years ago, he left Patricia a portfolio that had grown by the time she rewrote her will to just over $3 million. She had kept it in a separate account, in her name alone, which meant it had never appeared in any of the financial conversations Preston and Nadine might have overheard or inferred. There was also a small rental property in Tucson, a duplex she'd inherited from an aunt that she had been managing quietly for a decade. I knew about the duplex. I had not understood its value. Alan Marsh walked me through all of it. The trust, the accounts, the property, the insurance policy, all of it directed to me, with specific language that reflected what Patricia had thought and what she had decided. She had also left Preston something, not nothing. She wasn't a cruel woman, but what she left him was proportional to something, to the way he had behaved, the questions he had asked, the look on his face in the hospital room when she was still alive, and he was already calculating. She knew. She had known before I let myself know. I called Preston on a Wednesday afternoon and I told him I needed him to come to the house alone. Not with Nadine. Alone. He came. I sat him down at the kitchen table where 6 weeks earlier he had told me my house was too big for one person. I set a copy of the trust documents in front of him. I set a copy of the letter from Alan Marsh's office. I did not say anything dramatic. I did not raise my voice. I'm 67 years old, and I've been through things that make drama seem like a waste of good time. I told him the house was mine. I told him the trust had been established legally and properly, and that any action he took to contest it would be expensive, time-consuming, and unsuccessful. I told him that Alan Marsh had already reviewed the community property statute question and that even if the trust were somehow challenged, my rights as surviving spouse were clear. Preston sat very still. I also told him that the moving company he'd scheduled could be canceled and that if anyone showed up at my door on Saturday with a truck, I would call the Coconino County Sheriff's Office. He asked me why I hadn't said any of this earlier. I told him I had needed a few days. He asked if this was about Nadine. I told him it was about him. That Nadine did what Nadine did, but Preston was my son, and the decisions he had made were his decisions, made in his name at his mother's kitchen table, with his mother's name in his mouth. He didn't say anything after that for a while. Then he asked about the inheritance, what his mother had left him. I told him he'd be hearing from Alan Marsh, and that it was more than he deserved and less than he'd expected, and that I hoped he'd use it more wisely than he'd used the past several months. He left. I made a cup of coffee. I sat at the kitchen table, and I looked out the window at the elm tree in the backyard, the one we'd planted when our sons started kindergarten, the one that's now taller than the roofline. I still make one cup in the morning. I haven't changed that. But I've changed other things. I repainted the bedroom, not to erase Patricia, but because she always wanted the walls a different color, and I always said it was too much trouble. It's sage green now. She would have liked it. Gordon came over last week with a six-pack, and we sat on the back porch and watched the sun go down over the mountains, and he asked how things were with Preston. I told him we were in a quiet place. Not good, not completely severed, just quiet. He nodded like he understood, because Gordon is a man who understands that some things don't resolve themselves cleanly. They just become something you carry differently. Nadine called me once, about 3 weeks after the conversation with Preston. She called to apologize, she said. I listened. She said she'd made assumptions and she was sorry. I told her I appreciated the call. That was all I said. Preston and I have spoken twice since then. The conversations were short. There are things between us now that I don't know how to bridge, and I suspect he doesn't either. He is still my son. He will always be my son. But there is a version of my son, the one who came to this house with a cardboard box while his father was still raw with grief, that I cannot unknow. That version exists now in my understanding of him, and some doors, once opened, are very hard to close. What I know is this. Patricia saw it coming before I could admit it was coming. She sat in Alan Marsh's office in a cream-colored blouse on a bright February morning 8 months before anyone knew she was sick, and she took care of me the way she had taken care of me for 51 years, quietly, without fuss, without asking for credit. She always was the smarter one. The reading glasses are still on the nightstand. I've thought about putting them away. I haven't yet. I think I'll leave them a little longer. The cardboard box is still sitting in the corner of the garage. I haven't broken it down yet. Some mornings I walk past it and I don't feel anger anymore. I just feel the weight of what it represented. My son brought that box to my door 6 weeks after I buried his mother. He meant it as a signal that the decision was already made, that I was already gone in his mind. What he didn't understand is that you can't reduce a person to what they own or where they sleep, and you certainly can't reduce a marriage of 51 years to a deed with one name on it. I've thought a lot about what went wrong with Preston. Not to excuse it, there is no excusing it, but to understand it, because understanding is the only tool I have left that doesn't cost me something. What I keep coming back to is this. Somewhere along the way, my son stopped measuring his life by what he built and started measuring it by what he stood to receive. That is a quiet kind of moral failure. The kind that doesn't announce itself until there's a crisis, and suddenly you see exactly who a person has become. Patricia saw it before I did. That's the part that stays with me. She sat in an attorney's office in February, a full 8 months before the diagnosis, and she made provisions not because she was afraid of dying, but because she was paying attention. She had been paying attention to Preston for years, to the questions he asked, to the way his eyes moved around a room when money was mentioned, and she acted on what she saw. That is a kind of intelligence that I don't think gets enough credit. It isn't book knowledge. It's the slower, harder kind. The willingness to see something clearly, even when you love the person you're seeing it in, and then to do something about it without drama and without waiting for someone else to handle it. I was not as clear-eyed. I kept giving Preston the benefit of the doubt because he was my son and because it is painful to stop doing that. But there is a difference between loyalty and willful blindness, and I had drifted too far toward the second one. When he sat across from me at that kitchen table and used his mother's name to justify taking my home, something in me finally stopped making excuses, not out of anger, out of clarity. And clarity, I've learned, is not a gift. It's something you have to choose, even when it costs you. What got me through those weeks wasn't rage, and it wasn't luck. It was the ability to sit still long enough to think, to read the statutes, to call the referral line, to wait before reacting. I'm 67 years old, and I have spent most of my adult life solving problems methodically. That is what 34 years of civil engineering teaches you, and I applied that same steadiness to the worst situation I have ever been in. Not because I am exceptional, because I made myself stay calm when every instinct said to panic or lash out. That kind of steadiness is not something you find in a moment of crisis. You build it, slowly, over a lifetime of choosing it. Preston will have to reckon with what he did in his own time and in his own way. I cannot do that for him. What I can do is choose, every day, who I am going to be on the other side of this. Bitter is one option. I understand the appeal, but bitter is a closed room, and I've already spent enough of this year in closed rooms. The elm tree in the backyard is fully leafed out now. Patricia and I planted it the year Preston started kindergarten. I look at it most mornings from the kitchen window with my 1 cup of coffee, and I think about the 33 years of ordinary life that filled this house. The dinners, the arguments, the Christmases, the long, quiet evenings that felt unremarkable at the time and feel irreplaceable now. She took care of me. Even at the end, she was taking care of me. The least I can do is take care of what she left behind, starting with myself.